we would love to hear from Dr. Linda Prieto about Upward Scholars. Who are you? What do you do? And who is Luis Romero?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nancy and team, for the introduction and actually for the opportunity to be here and speak briefly about Upward Scholars as your partner spotlight. As you mentioned, Nancy, Upward Scholars is really dedicated to serving our adult immigrants across San Mateo County. As you can see here, we're a Latinx-led nonprofit, and our goal is to help adult immigrants regardless of nationality or citizenship status to be able to break the cycle of poverty. And we'll go on to the next slide, just a couple to keep us moving along. So the first pillar of support that Nancy mentioned is financial support. And so here you get a nice little menu of all of the different programming and services that we offer under financial support. One of those being, for example, computers, another being textbooks and course materials. And we've continued to grow this over the 12 years of the existence of Upward Scholars. And we'll go on to our second pillar of support now. And that pillar being academic support. This is more of a timeline glimpse, as you can see, where we started in 2014 with our first student completing all of the ESL courses at the community college, then moving on to the requirements for an associate degree to transfer, and indeed successfully transferring on to a four-year university, all the way to present day or last year, which was our newest academic support service that we offered, our peer facilitator program, of whom actually Luis has served in this role for us in this past summer. And we'll move on to our third pillar of support. And that's career development support. It's one of our newer pillars that we started, as you can see, back in 2014, but really ramped it up right before the pandemic hit. Our students, as you can imagine, are adult students in the program who are about median age 35, and parents of school-age children themselves were really hard hit. Most of our students are also Latinx identified. So as we know in the county, we're also not hardest hit economically, but also with COVID cases themselves. So really trying in everything that we do, and we can go on and move to the holistic support, really trying to find all of the ways that we can provide wraparound services or partner with other nonprofits and agencies and community-based organizations throughout the county. And one of the ways that we did that was to start our very own safety net fund at the end of 2020, which we have continued to this day to help our adult immigrant students meet their basic needs, as well as a spiritual, emotional support group that I get to run with the support of staff and a bilingual bicultural chaplain as well. And so this gives you an overall of who we are as an organization. We rely, as you'll see in the next slide, on donors and volunteers to help us be successful in our efforts. And so what you get to see here is all of our contact information, our handles for social media. If there are any prospective students out there, or any of you who work with prospective students who are wanting to learn English from low-income households, we would love to include them into our Upward Scholars family. Thank you so much. And so with that, we can stop sharing slides, and I'll take just a couple of moments to introduce Luis, who, as you've heard, is an amazing student in the Upward Scholars program, providing the interpretation this evening. Luis Romero, in terms of his bio, is an immigrant and an entrepreneur. He believes that the American dream goes beyond material success. He says, quote, "The American dream is the freedom to dream of possibilities," end quote. His belief in education as a great equalizer led him back to school as an adult. Luis transitioned from working in the food industry to his current job, which is working as a Spanish coach and Spanish interpreter with Upward Scholars. And language equity is a topic that is crucial to him. And he is involved with several organizations to ensure better understanding between languages and communities. Luis has received multiple certificates from Cañada College, where he currently attends, and most recently, a certificate in bilingualism and biliteracy in English and Spanish. Next fall, he will transfer to a four-year university. His goal is to continue his education so he is able to help our community in even more ways. Such a joy for me to be able to tell you a little bit more about Luis Romero. Thank you so much.
And we're thrilled to have Luis here. And interpretation, every all hands meeting event from here on out, every monthly event, we are going to have interpretation. So thank you so much, Luis, and thank you, Linda. It's a wonderful local organization. There are a lot of people are involved as tutors, as in their conversation club and other events. So you don't have to speak Spanish to help with that organization. So next, I'm thrilled to introduce our featured speaker, Mike Gennaco of the OIR group. He's going to be talking about how oversight works. Mike is a nationally recognized expert on law enforcement reform and accountability systems. He was the chief attorney of the Office of Independent Review for LA County, and he's a founding principal of the OIR group. He's performed a number of monitoring tasks, audits, and reviews for a federal judge, special masters, and other government entities. Mike has assisted law enforcement throughout the country with constitutional policing issues, critical incident reviews, internal affairs investigations, and design of effective oversight mechanisms. Under his leadership, the OIR group has become a resource for numerous California cities and counties, grappling with officer-involved shootings and other critical incidents in an effort to bridge the gap between the police and the communities they serve. And using these incidents as a learning tool. He's currently serving as the auditor for Santa Clara County. Prior to starting OIR, he was the chief of the Civil Rights Section at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Central District of California, and he served for 10 years as a trial attorney with the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. During this time, he supervised over 20 federal grand jury investigations into police misconduct and conducted a number of successful civil rights prosecutions against police officers for excessive force, including officers of the LA Police Department, the LA Sheriff's Department, and federal immigration detention officers. Mike graduated from Dartmouth College and received his law degree from Stanford University. So thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you, Nancy. It's great to be part of the group this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all. Thank you for the nice introduction, Nancy. The older I get, the longer that tends to take, and I don't want to take up all the time this evening talking about how long I've been on this earth. But I'm here to really talk about oversight, particularly police oversight. And let me start by giving you a sort of a thumbnail of the concepts of oversight, how long we've had it, and we haven't had it that long, actually. I think Berkeley was the first city to actually come up with any kind of police oversight with a review board back in the late 60s, which I can remember the late 60s, so it can't be that long ago, can it? But in the scheme of things, oversight is a relatively new way of looking at how best to interface with those who perform public safety in our counties and in our cities. It's new in the sense that as policing became a profession in this country and became a profession in this country, there wasn't much, if any, oversight. In fact, what there was really deference, extreme deference to policing. And the chief of police or the sheriff pretty much got to decide on his own. And unfortunately, through most of that history, it was a his, but we're getting some more folks from the female gender participating in this process too. But generally speaking, the sheriff and chief of police got to make all the decisions on how they would perform their public safety function. And there was rare cases in which there was any kind of expectations or involvement or intervention or oversight or supervision of how the police did their business. The police decided what the policies were of the police department. The sheriffs decided what the policies were of the sheriff's department. And when it came to engagement, there was really not much in the sense of certainly there was meet and greets and things like that throughout the counties and cities in the country. But with regard to having involvement in how public safety was going to be performed in any particular jurisdiction, that was virtually non-existent, as I said, for the majority of the time that we've had professional policing and professional law enforcement officers in our country. That has changed, starting with the late 60s, going through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and really escalating after the George Floyd murder. More and more jurisdictions are becoming interested in developing some type of oversight over their law enforcement agencies. And the interesting and perhaps more challenging aspect of that is how that is going to look. Because for those jurisdictions that do have any kind of oversight or community engagement or community advisory boards, they vary significantly throughout the country on the responsibilities of any oversight entity, who makes up the oversight entity, how that functions, and how the oversight entity interrelates to the community for which they're responsible. The traditional model is one of what is generally called a review board model. And that model is now considered sort of oversight light. And the review board model is a group of individuals, sometimes appointed by council, sometimes appointed by the city manager, sometimes appointed by the chief or the sheriff himself or herself. But the review board model was called upon at times to hear about new initiatives, hear about new ways of doing business, but really not having much authority and not much having much responsibility other than to sort of be a sounding board, if you will, for the chief of police or the sheriff. And that was the model that was pretty much in vogue for probably the first 30 years of oversight in this country. More recently, and perhaps sort of surpassing the trend is to have a more involved or more engaged oversight entity instead of the traditional civilian review board model. And what I mean by that is there has been increasing interest in having these bodies, whether it's a review board or commission, or whether it's a inspector general or independent police auditor, have more to say about how policing is going or how public safety is going to be performed in any particular jurisdiction. And what that more to say is really a debate that goes on in virtually every jurisdiction that I'm working with some individuals wanting there to be more community control of policing or public safety, whereas others want it to be more of a collaborative community engagement, and with variations all the way through the spectrum. That discussion continues to occur in many jurisdictions, particularly those who are interested in designing some form of oversight where none existed. And let's be a little real here in the sense of oversight, while it is growing, and it has grown significantly over the past 2 years in the state of California in particular, more and more cities and counties are coming online with some form of oversight. Those that have had oversight for a while are reimagining the way in which oversight is going to happen and expanding the breadth of the auditor, expanding the responsibilities of the commission. And that continues to this day. But the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of police agencies and sheriff's departments throughout the state of California and throughout the rest of the country have no oversight, have absolutely zero oversight. In Santa Clara County, there has been oversight in the city of San Jose for quite a while, as the history of oversight is. Palo Alto's had oversight for a decade and a half. The county of Santa Clara, and we are the monitors for that entity, has been up and running for almost 3 years now, but only 3 years. And if you look at all the other jurisdictions in that county, they've got nothing. If we look at San Mateo County, because we probably should look at San Mateo County, there's no independent police agency or law enforcement agency in the county that has any kind of oversight. If you go down the road to San Francisco, you have something there. If you go across the bay to Alameda County, you may have 1 or 2 cities, Berkeley, Oakland, that have oversight, but no one else does. If you go up further north to Marin County, you don't find much. If you go further north up to Sonoma County, you have 1, maybe 2 entities that have some sort of oversight. So you can see that it is still a minority piece of any law enforcement entity, even in the state of California, which prides itself on being as one of the more progressive states when it comes to public safety. That being said, as more and more agencies and more communities are considering how best to engage and how best to have input into decisions on how public safety is going to be performed in their jurisdiction, the communities who are of interest, like your organization, have to tackle all kinds of issues about what the scope and breadth of oversight is going to be. I'm heading to our national convention on Sunday. We have every year the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. And we continue to have these discussions about what those roles are. But there are some aspects upon which there is no debate. And that is what I call the 3 essential aspects that must exist for oversight to be effective. Those 3 are that the oversight entity has to be independent. It cannot come within the law enforcement agency. It has to be an independent entity that has the ability to weigh in on how law enforcement is doing in the particular jurisdiction, but doing so in an independent way. The second aspect of essential oversight is that of access. Some entity has to have unfettered and complete access to confidential information that is generally protected and confidential under California state law. The question is who that entity is going to be, and we can talk about that later. But whether it's the independent police auditor or the commission itself, some entity has to have the ability to access confidential information. Without that ability, oversight will not be effective in any particular jurisdiction. And we can talk about that later as well. And finally, in my view, for any oversight entity to be effective, it has to have the ability to be transparent. And what I mean by that is it has to have the ability to tell its public, to tell its community what it's finding when it is reviewing aspects of any law enforcement organization. The public reporting piece is critical in order for any oversight to be effective. And as I've said, oversights like snowflakes, no 2 are alike. I think that's actually not a bad thing because it allows living laboratories to evolve. It allows oversight to evolve even within jurisdictions and get better and learn from their mistakes. And I think that's a good feature of any oversight as it's designed. And in fact, one of my recommendations is when groups like yours are considering what that oversight entity should look like, is to have in the ordinance or whatever it is that's going to create the oversight entity, have something in the ordinance itself that will cause a required revisit of the ordinance after a certain period of time, whether that's 2, 3, or 5 years, having a clause in the ordinance to say, we ought to come back and review how we are doing or how this has gone at some finite period of time so that we can see what works, what could be improved, whether the scope of work needs to be changed, whether the composition of the entity needs to be revisited. All of those things should happen on a regular basis. Many law enforcement organizations do the same thing with their policies, which requires, after a 3-year period, a whole look at all the policies that guide law enforcement deputies and officers to see if there are ways in which those policies should be improved as a regular course, not waiting for state law to change. As I indicated, while there are numerous kinds of oversight and numerous types of oversight, what I have found to be an effective model in my experience is what I call a hybrid, a community-based police auditor or inspector general model. And what I find about this hybrid model to be most attractive is that I think it provides the best of both worlds. The model generally consists of a community-based group, whether that's a commission, whether that is a board, whatever you want to call it, but it is a group of individuals who reside within the county or the city and are interested in oversight, don't have any particular expertise in the field, but have a real passion for how public safety is being performed in the jurisdiction and want to make a difference. Generally speaking, these commissions and boards are volunteers, but that doesn't mean that they can't and won't have a significant influence on the way in which public safety is performed in their particular jurisdiction. And I have found that these volunteer boards can and do make a difference if they have a good understanding of what their responsibilities are, if they have sufficient support to assist them in their objectives, if they have a good understanding of what their roles and responsibilities are going to be. The other thing that I think is really important and helpful, and which moves them away from the traditional review board models, is I think that community-facing organization or board, commission, also needs to be paired with an individual or group of individuals who have an expertise in police practices. They don't necessarily need to come from police or law enforcement or the sheriffs, that kind of background, but they need to have some sort of skill and expertise with regard to how law enforcement is performed in the state of California, the country today. And without that level of expertise, I do think that it is very challenging for simple volunteers to try and successfully complete all of the oversight function without assistance from somebody who has a level of expertise in the field. What I like to see is the collaboration between the commission and board and the inspector general, where the inspector general will often receive assignments from the board or commission on what they want the IG to be looking at, and then reporting back to the board and commission on what it finds, so what the IG finds through a review of confidential material. It can't just be a review of policies, it has to be a review of the actual work being done in the field, whether that's a review of the investigation of an officer-involved shooting, whether that's a review of an investigation of a force incident, or whether that's a review of a complaint investigation. There needs to be that ability to get behind the curtain, review it, protect the confidentiality of that material, but find a way to report out to the board and commission what it's finding. And also the board and commission can provide a real assistance to the IG as well, in the sense that the IG often may not even reside in the jurisdiction, so doesn't have that same close ties that volunteers and residents of the county would have. And so in Santa Clara County, for example, we have that community-based group, And I rely on them, my team relies on them a lot to tell us what's going on in Santa Clara County, because we don't live in Santa Clara County. And that kind of knowledge, what's going on, what is being talked about, what the papers are writing about, is indispensable for an effective IG in my view. So that is a very high level introduction to the field of oversight. And it's my best recommendation. I am certainly aware of other ways in which oversight is being conducted throughout the state, and I'm willing to opine to the degree I have knowledge and familiarity with them. But I really appreciate you all's interest. I think that this is an exciting time for law enforcement. I think that reinventing law enforcement is continuing to be part of the narrative, and what that's going to look like 3, 5, 10 years from now. I think that certainly law enforcement needs to be part of that discussion and be at the table. And I appreciate the fact that your incoming sheriff is part of this discussion or part of this event this evening. That says a lot about the interest. But I do think that there's a recognition now that police and sheriffs can't do this on their own anymore. And the way in which communities engage with public safety and the way in which they influence public safety, that's what oversight is all about. I think that's what the intent of any oversight group is. And I welcome and look forward to any questions you all have. Again, a shout out to you all. Thank you for your interest in this topic, and really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening.
Thank you, Mike, for your insight. I have a couple of questions from the chat, but I'm just going to elevate.
Sure.
The first one I see here is, I've read that while there are far more oversight boards now than there were 5 years ago, that killings by law enforcement officers hasn't gone down at all. As an oversight advocate, this concerns me. Can you say anything about the expectations for what oversight can achieve and your thoughts on the persistence of these civilian deaths?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. First off, I don't know whether officer involved, I think the question really is talking about in custody deaths or officer involved shootings, which are the primary cause of individuals dying at the hands of law enforcement. But I have absolutely no confidence about the data with regard to officer involved shootings or in custody deaths, because the data is not reliable data. That being said, whether officer involved shootings go up and down is certainly a factor of many things, and oversight alone is I think going to be eventually a necessary but not sufficient component with regard to addressing the use of deadly force and the limitations on deadly force unless it's absolutely necessary and the life of a deputy or another is at stake. To reducing those incidents is certainly part of oversight. But to think that the creation of an oversight will overnight stop in custody deaths and officer involved shootings from happening is something that is overselling the whole concept. You're not going to stop that with creating oversight. But what you are going to do is probably going to better prepare deputies through training, through accountability, and through other mechanisms to reduce the likelihood that future incidents will result in the use of deadly force. And I believe that has happened. What you can't count also is the number of officer-involved shootings that haven't occurred as a result of oversight being involved in training, developing better policies, and providing better guidance to law enforcement.
Thank you. Training definitely is a step forward. I agree. It's not gonna cure 100% civilian deaths, but it's a step forward. The second question we have here is, what are some of the most common challenges you know of that oversight groups face? And what are some of the local successes you can also share, which I think you alluded on to San Jose, Palo Alto, San Francisco. But if you can just share, I guess, more nuances or more particular details of those.
Yeah. The challenges can and do vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and some of that is dependent on the degree to which oversight is created, and once it's created, to the degree to which it is supported by the city or county, as well as the leader of the law enforcement agency to which the oversight entity is responsible. Those are the biggest challenges. I think that more and more progressive leadership in law enforcement have begun to recognize the value of having community engagement and having oversight that is effective and helpful to the organization. And I think that those thoughtful leaders can and do support oversight in a way in which it benefits their agency and organization. There are others within the organization who may not be as keen on the concepts of oversight. I do think that the rank and file who are not used to oversight often have, at least initially, some nervousness about having civilians sort of be involved in evaluating the decision-making that they're making out in the field every day. And that is certainly a hurdle that needs to be considered and to be addressed. But I think that over time, that nervousness, that anxiety is reduced. And I can just tell you longitudinally, for example, in Palo Alto, when we first got started there, the officers were very nervous about us being involved in reviewing complaint investigations and uses of force. But now that anxiety level has gone down significantly in that city, and officers who have been hired over the past 15 years for Palo Alto don't know any different than the fact that there is an independent police auditor that has been working and evaluating their decision-making over the past dozen or so years.
Thank you for that insight. And I see the questions are pouring in. I'm gonna try my best to get to all of the questions. But if I'm not, we can certainly chat more about your question. We can forward it maybe to Mike later on. Another question we have here: does a volunteer civilian oversight board, by its nature of being unpaid, reduce the likelihood of participation by some of the most vulnerable populations who have a huge stake in law enforcement? How do we engage those voices?
That's an excellent question. I do think that the volunteer aspect of community boards and commissions, just like with all aspects of government, it is difficult for working class individuals sometimes to, when they have so much going on in their lives and so many other responsibilities, to volunteer is sometimes a challenge and a hurdle. And as a result, it reduces the level of engagement for, I think, numerous working class folks who just have too much else on their plate. And so some jurisdictions have tried to get at that by providing stipends, by providing childcare, providing other resources so that individuals who do have the interest in being part of these boards and commissions have some offloading responsibilities and some ability to do that. Although I do say that is probably only a handful of folks handful of entities that have gone that way. Although I do think that is some way, there needs to be more thought on how do we free up individuals who are very busy and have an important voice to be heard so that they can participate in this process. I think that is something worthy of discussion and continued consideration.
Thank you. Definitely a consideration that we have spoken about at length. We do want to be as inclusive. in our formulation of our oversight. So definitely discussion that merits further conversation. I have here another question. And this question, I'm just going to interpret it, but it's regarding other countries, if they have any models that maybe we should focus on or study.
I'm aware of other models. There are not as many models throughout the rest of the country as there are in the United States. But that's largely a function of the unique policing in the United States. What I mean by that is that there are some 20,000, and this is just a rough guess, no one knows the exact number, of independent cities and counties that have their own policing, have their own sheriffing. That is exotic. Most countries have one police department, and that's sort of a federalized police department. And so because of that fact, it's really hard to extrapolate how other countries are doing it when they have one police agency for the whole country, to America, where there are police departments with 2 people. There are police departments with 2,000 people. There are police departments with 20,000 people. And there are police departments with 50,000 people. And there are 20,000 of these groups throughout the country. So it's really difficult to extrapolate. And what I would say also is, to the degree that there is federal policing, we do have federal policing, the FBI, the DEA, the Department of Homeland Security. We do have these groups, but they don't have hardly any oversight. So that's a whole nother discussion that we can, defer. But so I'm not sure that the models that have been created outside of the country are necessarily applicable. I certainly have some good ideas that we can maybe borrow. And I'm all about stealing best practices from other entities if we can. But I do think it's going to be relatively limited.
Mio, I wanted to lift up Victor's questions in chat because he's on Sheriff-elect Corpus's team, and he has 2 good questions. Who has the most successful oversight model now, and is anyone using the hybrid model? Because Fixin San Mateo County is meeting with Sheriff-elect Corpus and her team to try to come up with a good ordinance. So we really want to know. He wants to know what would work.
The question was whether what are the other agencies are using the hybrid model? Is that what the question was?
That's one question. And the other question is, which agency are you aware of that has the most successful oversight model?
Now that the second question is going to get me in trouble with all the ones that I don't shout out to. So I may even try to dodge that question, although I may have an offline conversation with Victor if you'd like. But with regard to the model that I find the most effective, which is the hybrid model, we have got that going, obviously, in Santa Clara County, as I previously mentioned. But we also have one in the city of Davis, California. There's a hybrid model in the city of Anaheim, California. The city of Burbank has a hybrid model. So there are a number of, and they're growing, hybrid models throughout the state. Some which I'm not involved in. The city of Los Angeles has a hybrid model. The county of Los Angeles Sheriff's Department has a hybrid model. Same is true in San Diego County and city of San Diego. So I could go on, but I'll stop there in the interest of other questions that may be out there.
Thank you. And definitely, Victor, we can follow up with you on any other information that you would like to discuss with Mike. I am again I'm going in chronological order, but I'm guessing we're not going to get to all these questions. Please let us know if you still want the answer to your question. The next one would be, I'm going to abbreviate here. You mentioned another goal about oversight, not just accountability, but specifically implementing new structures in policing policy and procedures. Do you envision, can you talk about how oversight can affect the structure of law enforcement departments?
Absolutely, and I really appreciate that question because oftentimes, unfortunately, oftentimes what happens is that there is a controversial incident like an officer-involved shooting, in custody death, or some other controversy in a public safety agency that sparks the interest in oversight. And while I understand how that happens, it often causes, I think, to be an over-intensive focus on issues of accountability, issues of force, issues of complaints, issues of the way in which internal investigations are done, which are all critical. Don't get me wrong, they're critical. And that piece does need some level, in my view, some level of oversight does help with regard to how those functions are carried out. But I think those aspects are better handled or assessed by an independent police auditor, monitor, IG, who will have that access and that ability to then evaluate how well the department or agency is functioning in those areas. But the Board or Commission can, and I always urge them to be focusing on other aspects of public safety that are as important, and if not more important, to ensure a robust and functioning, high functioning public safety agency. And those include the way in which the agency recruits individuals into their organization, the way in which the agency makes decisions about who is going to be hired by that agency, the whole training process with regard to how new officers are onboarded into the agency. Once an agency gets a hire, how that employee is evaluated, and whether those criteria are consistent with what the community thinks should be important qualities that should be focused on in the evaluation process. Who is eligible for promotion and who makes promotion decisions is another piece that I think a board and commission can be very effective in looking at. How does the agency interface with their public? What is the public-facing dashboard on data that's provided by the agency? All of these things, I think boards and commissions are well equipped to do, and in some ways better equipped to do than even the IG. And it also doesn't require the access to that protected confidential information that sometimes becomes a hurdle and a challenge for the board and commission. So those are the areas in which I like to see boards and commissions focusing on, everything about reimagining how mental health, individuals who are in mental health crises are going to be serviced. Is that a police function solely, or is there other ways in which that can be diced and sliced? So those are the kinds of things that I encourage review boards and commissions that I work with to get involved in.
Thank you. And we're almost at a close. So I think we have just room for one more question before we close out. And again, I apologize if we didn't get to your question, but you can feel free to email us your questions and we can forward them to Mike. One last question is, and this one is one that we've grappled with quite a bit, is how do you determine which community members are placed on the oversight group? The concern is it might get political or it could affect the effectiveness of the oversight board.
That is probably one of the most challenging questions that every board commission is faced with. Right. Who is going to decide how this is, constituted? And the most frequent way in which that is that if you have 5 or 7 or 9 elected officials that are responsible for the policy direction of the county or city, they each appoint one, and then you have a board. But for the reasons that the question sort of suggested. Some believe that that type of selection process may cause the board to become too politicized, may cause the board to become shadows of the individuals who appointed them, and are maybe think they'll be expected to follow the philosophy of the individual who appointed them. And so there are those challenges. In Santa Clara County, what they did was they had every board member select one, which came to 5, but then the IG was able to nominate 4, with the idea that that would cause there to be less politicization of the process. I don't know how that's working because it's still all very new, but I think we've had very good commission members in your neighboring county. And then I'll just throw another one out there. The city of Anaheim, because of the concerns that have been expressed, actually has a process where individuals will submit interest in being considered for the review board. And then they have a lottery, and people are just picked out of a hat. And that also has gotten us a very good group, an effective group of individuals on that board.
Thank you so much. We'll definitely look into that. Mike, if you can indulge us for one more question. We have a participant who did not have availability for the chat and would like to come off mute to just ask it.
Of course.
As the last question. Mike, can you, you feel free to ask your question.
Has he been unmuted? Is he still muted?
We have to find him and ask him to unmute.
He's already off mute. That's why I thought he had a question to ask. But Mike Levinson, are you there? Okay, he may just be off mute for another reason.
Okay.
I'd be happy to address Mr. Levinson's question after this forum, as well as everyone else. If there is one more question, I'll be happy. Thank you for facilitating the questions. But if somebody wants to collect them, I'd be happy to address them at a later time.
Thank you.
I'll put my email in chat and people can email me and we'll get them to Mike. A couple of follow-ups. So too, Garrett Jensen is here from State Senator Josh Becker's office, and he would like to connect with you afterwards and talk about some ideas for state legislation. So I will make that an introduction, as well as Victor from Sheriff-elect Corpus's campaign will connect you with Victor and the Sheriff-elect Corpus as well.
Look forward to that conversation very much.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This was highly informative, and we're so grateful for you taking the time to speak to us. I'm just going to, we have just a few minutes left, and I just want to make a certain announcement before we close out. Again, much gratitude to Mike for his time.
And Mio, just interrupt. I expect that at least a couple commission members will be at our next National Conference of Law Enforcement. So you got a year.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for the reminder. I just wanted to just close this out. For those who have been who participated, just want to remind you all that of a couple of things. One is we are always looking for volunteers. I am right now heading the onboarding for volunteers. Some of you might have already received an email from me if you signed up through our online wishing to volunteer with us. So again, if you want to volunteer with us, please sign up in our website and I'll get your information through there and have a one-on-one discussion with you about the volunteer roles and our organization. Another announcement is there's a Board of Supervisors meeting on September 13th at 9 a.m. to make public comment. And if you haven't written a letter in support, this is the time to do it. If you need our main talking points, feel free to email us And we will provide that for you. But again, the Board of Supervisors meeting is September 13th at 9 a.m. You can make public comment. And I just want to wish everyone a good night. And thank you so much for coming. And I hope this was informative for all.